So, continuing in Esther. So last week, maybe you, or no, whatever, 2 weeks ago, maybe you remember this strange word that Matt used called peripety. It's a literary term used to really describe the pivot point in a story, like the moment in the story where everything changes. This is the story's peripety. And things, if you think about it, things were not looking good for the Jews up to the story's peripety. And so you think about they're living in exile in Persia under the king Ahasuerus, who's known to be a very radical king, kind of unstable. And then you see Haman come in, the king's right-hand man. The king gives him all the power that he could ever want, and he goes and tells the Jew, or he goes and edicts against the Jews a day where they're all going to be slaughtered. And so the Jews are not looking good. But there's a glimmer of hope. Right? Though it's just a glimmer, it's really not much, because Esther, who is a Jewish woman, has worked her way into the position of queen. However, her identity is still concealed. And so that presents its own challenges. Though she might be in the position of power, she has maybe not been completely open about her identity as the queen. And so Mordecai, though, sees this glimmer of hope, and he decides to act on it. So he says, look, Esther, maybe you were made for this moment right here. Maybe you should leverage your position as queen and advocate for God's people. So he says, look, maybe this is what you've been made for. And so Esther accepts the call, she takes action, and she risks her life to approach the king with a request. Look at that, applesauce in my pocket. That's funny. It's like, what is that? And so, now really what's profound, though we may not see it as very profound, the king decides not to kill her when she approaches him with an unsolicited request. Because it was common for the queen, even for the queen, if she approaches the king unwarranted, the king could kill her on the spot and be justified. And so just the fact that she risks her life, she comes to the king and the king receives her is like step one. Like that is a generous act. And so when she gets there, she makes a request. And she doesn't make her request known immediately. She says, will you come with me to 2 feasts that I will throw for you? And so the first feast they attend, and then she invites them to the second feast. But something very important, or a couple things that are very important, happen between the first and the second feast. So the first thing is Haman gets fed up with Mordecai, sees him again, gets upset, and decides that he's going to kill Mordecai. He's going to build a gallows for Mordecai to be hanged from, which is relevant as we will see today. So that's the first thing we see. The second thing that we see is what we said is the story's peripety, the pivot point. And this is where everything changes. We talked about how God inspires His Word. You know, we say that God inspires His Word, as no error, and is completely ordained by Him. That's not just in the text, like what it says. We would say that's also, He ordains the structure of the text, the literary structure of the text. We would say there's power even in the way that the Bible is constructed in that way. And here's a great example. Because though we have not seen God's name mentioned one time in the entire book of Esther, He makes Himself abundantly clear as the hero of the story by coming in and moving in the pivot point of the story when no other characters are around. You notice this? Because think about this. The pivot point is usually like in the story where the character kind of comes into his own and he realizes his potential and he steps in and saves the day. So Queen Esther, if it was her pivot point, she would step in and she'd save everybody. Or Mordecai takes the reins of the story and he saves the Jews. But here, the peripety, the pivot point of the story happens in a quiet night with King Ahasuerus having a hard time sleeping and God stirring him awake, reminding him to read the Chronicles, where he realizes he had not awarded Mordecai the way that he should for the honor that Mordecai showed him. So who's the hero in the story? The turning point of the story is when God intervenes when no other character is around. God may not be mentioned, but what a beautiful way for God to just construct the story in such a way where we see Him as the hero. And so that is the story's peripety, where everything changes, where the story really turns on its head, because we're going to see the tides change a little bit for the Jewish people. Now, We're going to pick up here in the story where Haman and the king are heading into Esther's second feast. Okay, so they're about to head in. This is another major moment in the story, but also a very major moment of faith in the life of Esther. A moment of faith. Her step of faith was not over yet. In fact, her step of faith, listen to this, places her in a position where constant faith is needed. You hear that? In our time today, we're going to talk through some of this, the realities of true faith. How it's not just one decision, but a step of faith leads us to live a life of faith. Okay, so we're going to unpack some of those realities today. But before we get too far ahead, we're going to jump into the text. And so we're going to, I would say, spend the bulk of our time unpacking a couple realities around true faith. And then I have some minor themes to point out, some contextual stuff to point out. We're going to spend the bulk of our time in like the first four verses. Anything before we get started? Have a drink. All right. So let's get going. Chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. So again, this is the second feast. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther?" He's here. He's went through the questions, the requests, and he's finally like, just what are you looking for? What are you asking for? What is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. And so it's time for Esther to make her request known. It is time for her to really step into the moment that we've been preparing for. And really, even more frightening, it's time for her to reveal her identity as queen. Now, again, I just want to help us experience the tension of this story that's going to exist here. We miss it when we see the whole story, like when most of us are familiar with the end of Esther. We miss the tension that exists here. Because what the queen now has to say is like, I'm not who you think I am. I'm actually a Jew. I don't know what you thought I was, but I am a Jewish person. And if you think about the king's tendency to respond very ill to people who do him wrong, man, who knows what could happen to Esther, especially considering that the king has proven he's not afraid to dispose of his queen. He did it with Queen Vashti first. That is why Esther sits on the throne, is because his first queen he was not happy with. He sent her away. And so as Esther's going to make this request, there's a lot of tension in her heart. Like, what's he going to say? How is he going to respond? Is he going to kill me on the spot when I tell him who I really am? So remember that tension. Don't let those things be lost on us. Okay, this is what she says, verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." And she adds this caveat: if we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Okay, so we're going to unpack this. So she says, "Save me and save my people." We are scheduled to be destroyed, killed, annihilated. She uses the terms that Haman puts in the clause in the edict. And she says, look, if we were just going to be sold into slaves, I wouldn't have said anything. Because I understand for you, the king, it would not be as profitable for us to come out of that. Like, I understand. I would not have intruded on that. But she says, my people are scheduled to be slaughtered, and I have to speak up. And so she does. She brings it to his attention. She's done it. She's made her request. She has stepped out in faith and sided with God's people. I want to camp out here for a while before we get to the king's response, because there's a couple things that I think we can see here that I believe is the crescendo of Esther's faith. So Esther's faith started a couple chapters ago, her act of faith, that is. And we see the crescendo here as she begins to share the complete truth and advocate for God's people in front of the king. And so here's what I'm going to see. If you like to take notes, this is kind of where I think we're going. We see two realities of true faith here. Two realities of true faith. One, we see that faith is a journey, not a decision, not just a decision. Faith is a journey, a lifelong journey, not just a decision. And then two, we see that faith necessitates, it requires that we boldly identify with God and His people. Okay, so those are two realities of true faith that I see, at least from this text. So, first is faith is a journey, not a decision. Okay? So, you remember how Mordecai comes to Esther and says, maybe you were made for this moment. This is for you. Or maybe you are, as queen, you have the opportunity to do something you would not be able to do otherwise. And she says, okay, I'll do it. I will take that on. However, do you see that decision of faith did not stop there? Because taking the first step of faith only invites her into more steps of faith. Only invites her to really, I would say, walk in a journey of faith, where she has decision after decision that has to be made in faith, not just one decision and it's done. So first, she says yes to Mordecai. She says, yes, I'll leverage my role in the palace out of faith. So that's the first thing. But then, it doesn't just stop there. Because then this decision leads her to the next moment where she must approach the king in faith, trusting that he will not kill her. She has to take another step of faith there. And then again, it doesn't stop there, because today we see her faith now takes her to make the request. Like this, it builds on one another. It doesn't stop. So we're seeing here that her faith was more than a decision. We see that? More than one decision, but it sparked a journey of faith. Now, from this very brief snapshot of Esther's life, the very brief time where we see these things carry out, we're reminded that making a decision, this is for us, making a decision to follow God in faith thrusts us into a journey of constant faith. Or it should. It should thrust us into a lifestyle of trust and faith. Faith is not just one or two decisions. True faith is like a journey, leading us to the really moments of the unknown and moments of the unfamiliar where we have to trust. If we think of it like this, if we were to illustrate it like this, true faith is like leaving the bank of a river, the stability of a bank of a river, and finding one step to step on the way. And then you take another step, and another step, and another step, until what you find is that you're far from the familiar bank, and you're in the middle of the creek bed, and you realize that any step you take from here on has to be in faith. There is no stability to jump back to. So this is what true faith really pushes us into, are frequent steps of faith. And so I would say here that the journey of faith looks like this. By definition, walking in faith means to trust God with the unknown. Walking in faith means to trust God with the unknown. But that's okay, because that's what we desire, isn't it? Is it, though? Right. That's the challenge that I experienced when I was reading this. Do I desire my faith to be stretching me into the unknown? Or have we forgotten what our Savior has called us to? Have we been led to believe that our faith is just what we exercise when we need help, or when we need to get out of this scary place to get us to the next place of security? Have we treated our faith as just the path across the river to get us to the next steady bank, and forget that life is called to be, meant to be, a life of constant faith, maybe without stability? Have we forgotten, listen to this, have we forsaken a life, a journey of bold faith and trust, and traded it instead with a life of convenience and practicality? Or at least a faith that will get us to as quick as possible to the place of convenience? And I began to think about this. Have we forgotten that we follow the God, or claimed to, who called his people to walk through the Red Sea that he parted, and then to walk into the unknown, into the wilderness? Have we forgotten that we follow a God who called Abraham to leave everything he called familiar? Have we forgotten that we follow a God who told Esther to go and boldly go before the king and deny or forget or neglect anything that might happen as a result of her request? Have we forgotten that we follow the God who called Peter to walk out on the water? Have we forgotten that we follow Jesus, who looks to us and says, pick up your cross and follow me? This is a life of faith that we're called to live in constantly. So I think, are we living in faith to follow God into the uncertainty? I think we are all called at times to be reminded of that question, to ask in a fresh way again, are we living in faith? Because what I know about growing up and growing in, as I grow up and I have more dependence on me, and I have more things that I feel like ends that need to be met, what I find is that sometimes I trade faith completely and wholeheartedly for practicality and convenience, because I think and justify those things. But instead, God says, remember, this is a life of faith. And so, you are called to follow in faith wherever he leads. Now, I think what can happen, though, is that we can be content staying on the bank of uncertainty. The bank of certainty. The bank of familiarity. The place where it doesn't require us to exercise faith and trust in the Lord. That is where I think we can find ourselves at times. And so, I think what we are called to do is to poise ourselves, to remind our hearts, to remind ourselves we need to be open and asking the Lord, is there something I should do now at this moment in my life that would require me to step out in faith and trust? Like, we should be asking that question constantly. Kayla and I have been processing this a lot over the past 3 or 4 months as we've seen really this dependency on the Lord, this faith in the Lord begin to be traded for independence and dependency on ourselves. I think we thought, we moved here to plant a church, that was our step of faith, we'll ride that step of faith on, instead of recognizing it's a constant life of faith. And so what I want to do is just, first of all, are you with me on this? Yeah, what you got, Kim?
One thing that came to mind about us wanting that certainty, but one of the things in this story, the peripety, right, is it's actually not that certain.
Yep.
Like, that thing can be wiped out in a second.
Yeah, that's right.
And the things that we put our confidence in is really an illusion of certainty.
That's right.
And security.
Yep.
Because there is no certainty and security outside of God. And God says to the wind blow. You think, dry land is secure.
Yeah.
Well, walking on the water, and he tells you to, that's secure.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's like an illusion.
That's good.
So even telling myself that
Yeah.
is helpful to start walking on the water, because it's like, no. What's the real certainty?
Yeah.
Because it's not what my eyes see.
That's right. And actually, in my study, commentators have wrote, Esther really was not in a very safe situation. The palace seemed glamorous and seemed safe, but they have just wrote that when this edict was enacted and Jews began to get killed, Esther would have certainly been found out then. Like, I'm not saying we should take that lighter or that she wasn't acting in faith, but recognizing the stability that she may have felt in the kingdom may not have actually been there. So, great point. What I want to do is just give us a moment to think on this, because I think we all in our life need to be asking this question constantly, but sometimes need that push, that reminder that we need to be asking it. And so, when you think about your life, would you describe yourself as stuck on the bank of familiarity, or do you sense in your heart a willingness to take the next step of faith? Do you find yourself stuck on the bank of familiarity, the bank of familiarity, uninterested in taking a step of faith, or do you find yourself open? And let me give you a couple ways to think about this, to go deeper. Maybe think, what has you stuck? Maybe it's monotony, maybe it's rhythm, maybe it's being overwhelmed in your current state. What has you stuck? What do you need to do to unstick yourself, to be just open-minded and open-hearted to what God might want to do? And then maybe you do feel poised to take the next step. Maybe you are willing to say, Lord, what do you want? So maybe you would explore, what is that step for me? What might it be? I mean, these things could be anything from your family to where you live, to your money, to anything that God might say, open your grasp on these things. So take a moment. I'm going to give you some time to reflect here. All right. Any thoughts on this?
For me, sometimes it's more of a question of trying to discern whether I am on the faith of familiarity, or if the staying put is like the act of faith itself. So like when I talk about like Home Depot, for example, you know, it's like I've been there for a couple years. Didn't think I'd be at Home Depot for 2 years, you know. So like, but part of it is like, you know, wondering like, okay, so like my greater passion is coffee shop industry, you know, starting a coffee shop industry thing. So it's like, okay, am I just like at Home Depot because I'm exercising faith, like this is where God wants me at the moment to do something specific? Or is it that I'm sticking around there and God's using me because I am there, but maybe there's this other thing that's not happening because I'm not taking something?
Yeah.
And so that's more of like just a
For sure.
conundrum that I ponder here and there.
Yeah.
And I ask God for clarity on that,
Yeah.
I guess. Because I think that God can make very clear what he wants to make things
Yeah.
clear. So
I think what you say illustrates it well. We're talking about a posture here. Like, what is my disposition towards the Lord? Do I want to trust Him with my life? Am I open to do that? And so that could be staying still. It could be an act of faith. That's a great point. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have this kind of image of trying to step out in faith but still holding on to the shore.
Oh, yeah.
Like holding on to the stability. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, Becky.
Yeah. That's
You know,
good.
it's like, and I think also the other thing that really is a struggle for me is, I guess the ADD or whatever of like, oh, I'm gonna try this. Oh, I'm gonna try this. Oh, then like, or I can't try this because that'll slow down this. Or, you know,
Yeah.
it's like constant ping pong. I don't know.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, Kim.
I naturally go towards more of the faith, but then I feel really awkward, and I feel like I look stupid. And that bothers me, because I feel really misunderstood, I feel sloppy, I feel scrambly, like I feel like, and part of that is me, right? Like I'm taking my eyes off, so I'm starting to sink in the waves, right? But part of me is just like, I don't feel like I feel alone.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many things that make this challenging. So I'll just say, understand what you mean. Not only is there a trust situation we have to deal with the Lord, there is the uncertainty, the feeling like this isn't going to make sense to others. Certainly can resonate with that. That is part of faith. It's part of, especially in this world, God turns those things around, or at least, especially in our culture, faith is something that has been traded for with practicality and convenience because we have all those things here. And so often acts of faith are going to seem strange.
There was something that was on my mind about wanting to do and then up until like 2 or 3 weeks ago we were moving in
Yeah.
August, September.
Yep.
And then that went on.
Mhm.
But I had put that aside, so I mean, what we're moving, so what the heck?
Yeah.
Just waste my time on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, here I am. And so I guess for me, well, what it was is I wanted, for me, coming up through the Lord as a young person, women's Bible studies instrumental in my life. I just don't know how I would have grown as a Christian wife, grown as a Christian parent, grown as a Christian period, without those other women
Yeah.
raising me up, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I just have felt for the young people in this church,
Yeah.
and young women in particular, but there's so many schedule issues. God did give me a phone, but then I sit here and I go, well, maybe there was a time thing in the past. Maybe that's what we did in the old generation. We don't do that in this generation. So for me, I get stuck in this generational thing.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
what do we do now? You know, what's, you know, I don't know. I just get stuck.
Yeah.
And I, you know, and relevant in that
Yeah.
sense. What,
Yep.
Why would you want me to do that?
Yeah.
Does it need to be in me?
Yeah.
Was it need for me back then? Is it a need now? But God's word is always a need.
Yeah.
So,
I think you would, yes. Titus reminds us that you are called to pour into us, to pour into the younger generation, and through his word. So I would advocate and say, yes, I agree with you. Yeah. But yeah, again, to speak to just the nature of faith, like it can be unfamiliar, there can be uncertainty, and so, yeah, I understand. I'm going to keep us moving here. Yep, we need to keep moving. Because I do know that as I was preparing this, I was reminded that I believe it's my responsibility, my call as the pastor to call you to faith. And I mean, to wrestle with this myself as well. But you have financial advisors that can teach you how to use your money. There are others who can teach you these. I am called to call us to faith. Stewardship, yes, as well, but call us to faith. I have to put before you the Lord and say he's worth following. He's worth stepping out in faith. Like, we are Christians. We follow Jesus, and that should change everything. I would not be doing my responsibility and call as a pastor to not say to you, follow him completely. Teach your kids to follow him in faith, in radical trust. Teach them a life of faith in a world of unfaith. This is important for us to do. We must trust him. We need to keep moving. So we can talk more about this over the meal if we need to. But I just want to encourage us, poise ourselves to take steps of faith. This is one reality of true faith. Here's the second one, if you're taking notes. So the first one, faith is a journey, not just a decision. Second thing we see here is that faith necessitates that we identify with God and his people. That we would say, I am one of them. Listen, look at how Esther responds. She says, save me and save my people. My people. I'm with them. Notice she doesn't say, save me and save the Jews. Notice she also doesn't say, hey, go save the Jews. She says, save me and save my people as well. These are my people. She says, save me, save them. True faith proclaims that I am one of them. I am one of them. I'm reading Romans right now, and Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is who I am. It is what changes me. It's the power of God to save. I'm not ashamed of it. Not ashamed of it. And Esther risked it all to identify with God's people, reminding us that faith necessitates that we side with God's people, that we would say, yeah, I'm a Christian, and I'm not ashamed of it. Now, listen, I don't intend right here to ask you when the last time you shared the gospel was. I don't intend to ask you what makes you ashamed to share the gospel. What I want to do is have a very real conversation of what it means and the challenges that come with identifying with God's people in our current cultural moment. Now, you hear me say that a lot, I feel like. You hear me say, in our culture, in our cultural moment, I think it's very important for Christians to understand the culture and the influence that they live in. Because every person in every generation has had to deal and have been influenced by a cultural moment. A cultural moment really is just all the factors, the environments, the pressures, the politics, everything that shapes you and makes you who you are, or at least how you're influenced in the society that you live in. And understanding our culture, understanding our culture allows us to freely live and operate as Christians in this culture. And so I want us to, the word gospel fluency comes to mind. I want us to be good at taking inventory of the culture, of how we're influenced, understanding what has shaped us, so that we can apply the gospel and operate in the freedom that the gospel brings in our specific cultural moment. And you can do it with anything. Understand like how our culture has shaped our understanding of finances or of beauty, right? The things where we are understanding this is culturally how I've been taught. And then understanding this and then seeing how the gospel could shape the way that we operate in those terms. That's cultural moment. That's gospel fluency over our cultural moment. We want to be good at that as Christians so that we don't separate from the culture, but we stay within the culture and redeem it, right? We want to see it changed, redeemed. So we're going to do the same thing here as it relates to what are the challenges in our specific gospel cultural moment that makes it challenging to identify with God's people. Let me tell you two influences that I think or pitfalls that I think we can come into. First thing is that we are in a culture where there is this rise of non-threatening spirituality. Non-threatening spirituality. So this is where it's not uncommon to find people who are spiritual, right? It's not uncommon where spiritual terminology is kind of everywhere. It's not weird for people to talk about God or that man upstairs or what are other terms you hear? You'll hear things like karma or, yeah, that was a blessing, or that was things have been working out for my good for a reason, or hey, I'm going to pray on that. Like there is spiritual language that is common in our culture. But notice it is non-threatening. It's just speaking about a higher power because naturally there's less aversion from other people around that type of language. Like someone, I think we can understand the comfort in that category, right? Where you can talk about God and maybe easier sometimes than we talk about Jesus. Like there's more specific, there's more gospel there. And so if we're not careful, we will fall into that category of just non-threatening spirituality and in turn trade like a bold witness, a bold explanation or belief of where we stand. Because we would agree that someone saying they believe in God is a lot different than someone saying Jesus is king. It's a much different conversation. And so that's the first thing I want us to see, is that we are in an environment where non-threatening spirituality is common, and we can kind of slide ourselves in that category. And we will find ourselves loosely identifying with God's people. So that's the first thing, is I would say this non-threatening spirituality. Because we as Christians are called to be Christians, to follow Jesus, and to not be vague about it. Okay, second thing is this, and I'm going to say it first and I'm going to explain what I mean. It's going to sound strange at first. I think we can sometimes treat ourselves as outcasts. We can treat ourselves as outcasts. Here's what I mean. Sometimes we think that just because the broader culture has certain stigmas around Christianity, then we should be hesitant and quiet about who we are in Christ, because we understand that other people already have presuppositions and we allow ourselves to be conformed to that, or to fall into those, or to be fearful because we believe we're already under stigmas and stereotypes. And so I think this is interesting, though, because we're in a world of opinions, right? Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody has a voice. Everybody can say what they would like. Everyone is justified to have their own beliefs. Yet we feel awkward to share what we believe to be true because we succumb to the stigmas placed upon us by just saying we are considering ourselves to be an outcast already. You know, people might think Christians are judgmental. There's these stigmas. Christians are They don't think for themselves. Christians are strange. Christians are this and this and this. And these types of categories exist within the dialogue of our culture. And so we have to, I would say, fight to not place ourselves under those unnecessary stigmas that would then restrict our ability to, or our willingness to say who we are. So let me put some skin on this. Because here's what I think: we have to shake off those stigmas. Like, we have to not outcast ourselves and assume that what we have to say is strange just because what other people have to say is strange. Because if we are able to shake off these stigmas and have real conversations, honest conversations about how our faith shapes our life, and the first time someone hears from us about sin and Jesus dying on the cross, and that comes out after all of these conversations about how God has really on a ground level shaped our life, then we begin to realize that we are sharing we're sharing not just conversations, strange conversations, but we're sharing life-giving realities that have shaped our life. So you think describing my faith shapes how I relate to my kids. Surely that's not a stretch to be able to say that to someone else. Or my faith gives me a framework of how I could forgive my dad when I thought I never could. And these are real conversations. Or my faith leads me to better understand the world around me. Helps me put evil into a category and understand it well. My faith changes how I view myself. Like, these are conversations that the entire world is having, but we feel hesitant to talk about it in faith. The entire world is talking about these things, but we sometimes feel like ours doesn't matter, or that we outcast our opinion because we say we're already under those stigmas. And so, I share this because I think if we're able to shake off those things and begin to have real conversations around our faith in our cultural moment, then we understand what we have to say is speaking to the tension points of our entire culture, though we may not offer them. First of all, this is a lot. Does that make sense? Ben, you got it. So, we don't have time to discuss it. But what I want us to begin to see is we operate in a cultural moment. We operate with a world, with worldviews, with certain understandings of what Christians are. You operate in that in Pittsburgh with their own history of Christianity. It does us well to understand the culture that we live in so that we can speak to the specific tension points that exist in the lives around us. And this requires us boldly identifying with God's people, not placing ourselves in this outcast box and saying, no, what I have to say is relevant because what God has done has changed my life and has the power to do it to you as well. Okay. That's a lot. We're going to keep moving, though, because we need to get through this passage here. Because we're going to move now to the king's response. King's response in verse 5. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? And where is he? Who has dared to do this?" So he's saying, who is trying to kill your people? And Esther said, "A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Verse 7, and the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther. So Haman is really losing his mind right here. For he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. Verse 8, and the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. This was a big no-no. So this was a major infraction. Because here, according to the historian Edwin Yamauchi, even in the presence of others, a man was not to approach a woman of the king's harem within 7 steps. And so Haman, to plead for his life, went and laid down beside the queen, right as the king is coming in. Bad news for Haman. And so here is the king's response. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence?" Where he's digging the hole and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on that. And so you think the convictions are heaping up on Haman. First, he's trying to plot against the queen, even though the king was pretty illicit in that early on. But then, in a moment, he's seen lounging with the queen. And then, on top of that, if that wasn't enough, he was plotting to kill the man that the king had just honored for his loyalty. Yikes, things got bad for Haman quick.
Not to keep track from there, but what is the modern equivalent measurement of 7 steps?
7 steps? I don't know. Maybe really 7 steps. I'm not sure, but it was definitely not laying with her. Like, that would have been bad. I would imagine you were supposed to keep some distance. So I'm not really sure. But yeah, Haman is a dead man. Verse 10, so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and then the wrath of the king abated. Okay, so this is another moment of irony in this story. The honored man, Haman, becomes the dead man. The dead man, Mordecai, or soon to be dead, becomes the honored man. We see this irony. And we're going to point out all of these ironic reversals in our last session on this, where we really tie in these the ways that God was changing the course of things. But we're going to pass through that today, because I want to end us with a challenge that one of the commentators had said when I was reading this, preparing this, that I thought really stuck with me and I think challenges us well. Because what we see is that many things were hidden in this story and then uncovered here in this chapter. So, you think about Esther's request and her identity were hidden. They were hidden from the king. Also, Haman's plot against the queen and Mordecai were hidden. The king wasn't certain that that was against Esther and Mordecai. And this is what he says, when all of that was concealed becomes revealed, it ends in death for one person and potential freedom for the other. And the application that this guy brought on was this question: when what is concealed becomes revealed, will it be for your reward or your ruin? When what is concealed becomes revealed, will it be for your reward or for your ruin? And I love this. The way we live visible to the public eye is one thing. But the way we live in secret, behind the view of others, whether it be with honor and service to the Lord or with pride, self-indulgence, indifference to the Lord, this will be revealed before the Lord one moment or another. When what is concealed will be revealed, what will it mean for us? What will our lot be? Church, let it be true of us that as followers of Jesus, that we follow him whether we're here or when nobody is looking. When what we do in secret honor the Lord. What we do behind closed doors. What we do when it's just us alone. Let that be also a life that honors the Lord. Because one day it will be exposed. And I think it's a great challenge for us. I'll end us with this. We want to get good at taking when we read the Bible, doing what we can to see Christ exalted in some way. And that doesn't mean we take every passage to mean something about Jesus, but there are times where we can connect gospel themes throughout the Bible. I just want to bring attention to what it says at the very end. When it says that, where are we at? Yep, they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and then the wrath of the king abated. So, Haman's life ended hung on the gallows. So it's believed from Persian and Jewish history that usually when we think hanged, we think someone being hanged by something that's going to cause them to asphyxiate to death. But it was believed in Persian history that being hung is to be impaled on a stake to where you are visible to the watching world, and it's like an act of humiliation. That's right. It's supposed to show and be an example to others. And so it's believed that is the fate, that's the end that Haman met. And so if you think about this is Haman's dramatic, ironic end. And even in this brutality, we see a path to Christ. We see gospel themes here where Haman's justified death as he is pierced, as he is humiliated, for all to see, satisfies the wrath, he says, it was abated of this worldly king. In the same way, Christ, pierced, humiliated, and hanging from the gallows on the cross, for all the world to see, satisfies the holy wrath of the King of the world. These are gospel themes that draw us to worship. It's because of his death, burial, and resurrection that we can reap reward at the end of our days. That we can, what we did in private and in public, will be rewarded on Christ's work. And so, that's the last gospel theme I wanted us to see here. So, there it is. Live in true faith, walking a journey of faith, not a decision, boldly identifying with God and his people, and presenting a life worthy of God both publicly and privately. So, Ben's going to pick up in the story next week, in which case we see that Esther's tension is not over. You know, the king still hasn't said, all right, you guys are free. Like, we still have to see what the king's going to say, because the king has an edict out where he has put his stamp on and said, yes, kill all the Jews. So something has to be done with that, and you have a prideful king who's not accustomed to going back on his word if it makes him look bad. So, how will the king respond? We will see. All right, let me pray. All right, Lord, thank you for your word, and thank you for what you call us to. That you call us to faith, that you call us to a life that really looks much different than what our world around us might consider to be normal. Whether it be in the way that we make decisions or even in what we proclaim, you call us to faith, and that is for our good. Because ultimately, it is faith that brings us security. It is faith that brings us joy. It is faith in you that brings us into a fulfilling life. So God, would you help us to live in faith? Would you challenge us to at least poise ourselves, ready to take steps of faith? Lord, help us not to operate in our own devices and our own wisdom, but to trust you with our lives. And we thank you that you make it possible through Christ. It is in your name we pray. Amen.